Hey guys, Chainsaw Production here. I just want to do a follow-up video. I did a previous video on my experience at Station 12 as a former member, probationary member. I was there for basically a year. It was less than a year, but I also did time at other stations. A little bit of time at Brands Road, a little bit of time at Akik. So I spent about probably between 2 to 3 years in that, trying to get into a department. Um, it was hard. A lot of people. Uh, there was not a lot of training going on. I'll put it that way. There wasn't usually. There was like there wasn't emphasis on turning people over to red quickly. There wasn't emphasis on, hey, let's get you trained up. So when that first call drops, you know exactly what to do. It was like, here's a book, fill it out, do it on your own time. Like, we're not helping you. Like, you do it on your own time. And I was very outgoing, and I had to basically pull people's arms, not literally, but, figuratively, like, hey, kind of nag people to get people to do things. We had to do the checkoffs, basically, we would check equipment, and I had to do a certain amount of checkoffs before we could be turned over to ride. I had to nag people to do checkoffs. I had to, and I at one point got very frustrated with one of the captains, Heather Dotrich. She was part of another station and had some family issues, and that's fine. I understand that. But if you're with another station, that's your commitment. You shouldn't be with two stations. Be an officer at both. You need to be committed to one station, and that's it. She was the Potomac Heights at the time, and as a senior ranking official, I think she was like a captain or assistant deputy chief at 12. And it was really bad because I was like, hey, let's do a checkoff, hey, let's do a checkoff, hey, let's do a checkoff. And she was not available. She was extremely unreliable. I think I only rode one call with her, and that call was just horrible because she was not a good leader. Was very disorganized, very all over the place. And it was really sad because, when you go into these volunteer organizations, there's going to be a little bit of disorientation, but they advertise themselves as being very professional, oh, we got this. When they're on scene, they looks very organized, but at face value, it looks very good, but behind the scenes, it's an absolute mess. I remember I ran a call with the fire department, fireside at Torpedo Court. Basically, it was a garage fire started by too many outlets being overloaded. We ran the call as like a treatment because we were an ambulance. Basically burn treatment and oxygen, whatever they needed from the fire guys because it was a fire scene. And basically, after the call, we had a debrief, and the Sutter, he was like the assistant chief at the time, he ripped into all the fire guys and said, you need to, one person drove their personal vehicle, and you cannot drive your personal vehicle onto the fire ground. It was horrible. And it wasn't like, hey, it wasn't nicely talking about. It was like, hey, like very stern, very mean, very rude. It wasn't well conducted. His demeanor towards the other members of the fire department were not, hey, this is what we can do better. This one went wrong. Let's not do it again. It wasn't a friendly and polite and organized, respectful manner. It was very disrespectful, very rude, and it was not in a professional way. That really was interesting to me because there are certain protocols you have to follow when you're a volunteer, firefighter, EMS person, and these people weren't following protocol. They weren't doing checkoffs. They weren't doing went up for shifts, all kinds of stuff. They weren't cleaning the apparatuses, doing the equipment checks. There wasn't a lot of training going on. When I was with 12, there was little to none training. We had one person in EMS take training seriously, and it was for like the EMTs. It wasn't for the probationary people. There wasn't quizzes. There wasn't really you're supposed to have, each department is supposed to have like a night where they get them all the members together and do like a training session. There wasn't that. Um, Before I left, like the last month before I left, they did take it seriously and try to throw things around, but that then when it's too late. Um, the mistrust, the uh, lack of focus was definitely there, and just very, very rampant. The leadership was very bad. The Mitchell Lewis, the he was the EMS chief and the assistant chief in the fire side. He was never there. He was there, I think, twice. He didn't run. I think he ran one call with me, and he didn't assume IC or incident command is what it calls it. He didn't assume incident command. He was just there to watch. He showed up and just watched, and that was it. And it's okay if you're like if there's a if it was as a probationary member, if it was a fire scene, we just watch. That's fine. That's what we're expected to do. If even if you're a probationary fire member and you didn't have your clearance to ride yet, you just watch. That's fine. You're called observer position. You observe. But as a leader, a chief, I would expect if it was a fire scene, I expect him to take instant command. First arriving, you take instant command, but I expected him to say, "Hey, I'm instant commander now. This is what's going down. This is how it needs to be done," and then delegate his roles. Okay, you on the engine, you're doing such and such. You on the ambulance, you're doing such and such. Make sure when we leave, we're doing such and such. Really delegating in an organized fashion to control the scene and make sure everyone was where they need to be with what gear they need to have, because every person usually carries a little bit of gear with them into the call. Um, I got to the point now where when I would go on my shifts, it was an 8 hour shift. I'd go on my 8 hour shift to do an EMS checkoff. I would do the checkoff on my own, and I would literally be the only person doing the checkoff. No one else would care about checkoff. The leadership didn't care, and I was doing checkoffs on my own. And I'd be like, hey, we need this. Hey, we need that, and they were like, yeah, we'll get a next call. Yeah. No one took me seriously, and hey, we need that such and such. It was like we'll have zero equipment. We had like two things that they would say, oh, yeah, we'll get it when we run out, or we'll get it next call, or if we get low, we'll get some more. But it never was, hey, let's refill this. After each call, you're supposed to take inventory of what you used and make sure we stock that correct inventory. So let's say you used 5 band-aids on 2 people. You need to make sure you restock 5 band-aids if you have like a pack of 10. It wasn't, hey, let's take inventory after a call and make sure we resupply. It was, rig's good to go. And if we run out of equipment, it's, not our fault. I got to the point where I actually knew every compartment by number. Okay, this compartment has 4 items. This compartment has 6 items. I knew more than any of the incoming probationary members. I knew how to operate the stretcher. I knew basically everything until like when it comes to patient trash, I didn't know anything. But I knew everything about the gear. I knew how to fill all the forms out. I mean, I knew what calls meant. I knew what lingo meant. And it wasn't like, hey, we're hiding information from you. It was like, hey, they didn't care. They didn't care to train me. They didn't care to say, hey, as you're going through probation, this is what I'd like to see from you. They didn't do like checkups. Like if I was running a department and I was doing if I was putting someone on probation, I would like monthly checkup. Hey, this is what's going well. This is what is you need to work on. This is what you're not doing right. They didn't do any of that kind of stuff. They didn't check on me whatsoever. All they did was silently observe and silently judge. Definitely with discrimination with the station company 12, because they had people that got turned over, like voted in to be with the department, and they didn't do anything. They literally sat, ran like a call or two, and that was it. And I was the one that bust my butt. I bust my little butt. I kept getting top. They have little lead sheets like runner of the year, who's running the most calls, who's running the most calls over the year. For 2 years, I ran the most calls. I was that guy that was always on the call with you as your EMS aide. I was that guy. You had the 2 up front, and they usually had a driver, an officer, and an aide or 2. You got a 4 people, but ambulance. I was that guy. I was always running calls. I was there, 5 out of 7 days a week, 8 hour shifts, during weekends, during the day. I had an easy job. I think my job was 4 hours of the day, so I had a lot of time to commit to that. But during that time I was there, I was putting my heart and soul into that department and expecting to get voted in, and I got nothing. We got to a point where I was getting ready for training as I was getting ready to be turned over, voted in, and they said no, you're not, you're not, you're not gonna. We don't want to continue your advancement opportunity. They didn't tell me why. They didn't say. They just said nope, no class for you. It's too early. And I told them, I was like, I'm your guy. I want to work hard from you. I want to be on every single call when you guys are pull out the station. And they didn't. They didn't really care. I'm like, yeah, that's fine. They just nonchalant, very negative attitude. And I think they voted him out because not of my hard work. If you look at my stats on the station, I was on at least 90% of the calls from the time I was there. 90%. That's more. That's more than half. Over 75% plus. I was on those calls. Because they would each report they would have so and so who's the officer, who's the driver, who's the aides on the call, and they would put it on their report. Um, I was during 2021, 2022. Excuse me. I was doing that. That was my life. I put my heart and soul into that department. For them to say no, you voted out. You're not worth it. And I hope that was like my life at the time. I'm kind of getting choked up because I'm thinking about it. It's making me kind of sad. I put my heart and soul into the department, and they said, a giant F you in your face, simply because the color of my skin. I think it's definitely some discrimination. Definitely, they didn't see that here's a hardworking individual that wants to put their laying, putting their free time aside to be with you guys, and putting the work, a hard work ethic. I have extremely hard work ethic to run calls, to be there, to be reliable, to be committed, to be respectful. They're like, yeah, we don't care. They did not care. Station 12 did not care that I was hardworking, committed, loyal, respectful, on time, running calls, making them look good. They just thought that I was just another one of these wannabes, or they discriminated me based on my gender because I look different. I don't understand. When they voted me out and they said, "Hey, you're voted out." I said, "Why?" They said, "No, no reason." They could not give me a good reason why I was voted out. And I'm like, wow. Like that says they didn't give me an explanation. They said, "No, sorry, it's not fun for us." And I'm like, okay, I asked them why, and I had someone follow up with me. One of the lieutenants followed up with me and said, "Hey, you want to ride on Sunday?" And I was like, "No, because you guys voted me out, and I would love to ride. I would love to ride, but I'd be raking. There are certain rules of regulation. If you get voted out, that's it. Like you clean up your locker. It's basically getting voted out. Getting voted out is getting like hired for a position. Like you're being a probationary is like being intern, and then if they say yes after your vote in, you're hired, quote unquote hired for the department, and you basically volunteer for them. But if you say no, you're kicking rocks. You're moving on to whatever you're doing in life. And yes, they gave me a chance, and I really appreciate it. But I didn't take my chance for granted. I was there. I bust my butt for that station. Just for them to say no, you're not good enough. And I will never understand why they said no, because I was the one. And I remember telling the chief this. I was like, they were like, I remember they were talking to the members, and they were like, why aren't we doing so well? Like why are people not showing up? Why are people not writing calls? Like, and I'm like, look at the stats. Look at the stats. Look at the people who are running these calls. You'll see who is committed based on the statistics and the data. You will see, okay, this person needs to be voted in. This probationary. This person's running X amount of calls. These are people that are working hard for you. It's not based on who you like or who you dislike. It's based on the numbers. Who's running the most calls? You need to be looking at the data, not the people. Because if you look at the people, yes, if you're at work, yes, you're going to have a coworker you don't like. Not everyone's going to be perfect. Yeah, you're going to have maybe personalities collide, or I disagree with such and such opinion, or I don't mind working with such and such opinion, but that can, with a department, it can be kind of avoided. You can feel like, okay, you can schedule around shifts, you can work around that, you can solve your differences, you can work, you can work together to solve your differences if you're having problems. But when the assistant chief was like, "Hey, why aren't we getting enough people?" What? And I'm like, "Hey, there's people here that are committed like me. Look to people like me that are putting the work in and that are working their tail off for you." And and he snapped at me. The chief was like, "Why are you disrespecting me? Like, you don't know what you're doing. Like, why are you talking smart to me?" And I just backed down. I'm like, okay, I don't care. Like, my opinion doesn't matter. I'm just a little fish here. And so I just took it totally offensive. And I didn't choose to hold my ground because I'm probation. I didn't want to say anything, get in too much trouble. But at the same time, I was like, I'm glad I spoke up, even though it was on everyone's mind in the room. I'm sure it was just very frustrating because the captain, Bill Kitzmiller, I'm still a fan of him, and I still think he's a good person. But he was a person I loved to run because he was dedicated to training the EMTs and trying to raise the probies in a good way. He was a good officer, but at the end, he really showed me his true colors. Like the last week I was there, I did multiple like 3 shifts before um, it was time for my final vote, and he didn't show up. So that basically said, "Screw you, I don't like you." Which is it was what do we call it? Like silent hate. It was throwing shade. It was like, "Hey, I don't like you, and I don't like you. I'm not showing up to do a shift with you." And another thing was that I'm thinking about it now. It was interesting because it was like people um remember they me and other probationary members were like trying to ride with the actually did some calls with the DES. The DES was the paid crew and the volunteer crew for the EMS side. We ran calls with the paid crew, and they loved us. They were like, "Hey," we had a certain crew we ran with, and we're like, "Hey," they're like, "Hey, jump on." And we're like, "All right, let's go." Like they needed help, you know. And then here come the officers from the volunteer side said, "No, you can't do that." And I said, "Why? Why can't we do that?" They want the help. We're willing to help them. You guys are not here to you guys are not showing up for your shifts and not being here to be you're not being held accountable for showing up late. You're not here, so when we get calls, we can't go anywhere. Every person on a call is important. Whether it's a crew of 2, 3, 5, 6, every person has a job to do. Whether it's on an ambulance, every person has a job. So like a driver, EMT officer that does a patient care, you have maybe EMT or two that does patient care when it's an officer, and a probationary does paperwork or gets gear. That's how it goes on EMS, and then the fire, each seat has a certain delegation. So like the driver, you have an officer, and you have 4 other people. So one person does entry, forcible entry. One person's an extra. One person runs hose. And another person is like the search and rescue. So like you have 6 people that ride on apparatus. They all have, based on where they sit, they have a certain job to do. Um, Basically, they're where they sit, and they kind of discuss it as they're going to the call. Okay, so and so is gonna do hose line. So and so is gonna be the extra. So and so is gonna do search and rescue. So and so is gonna do whatever this is, and you kind of, as you're going on the call, you kind of delegate who's going to do what. There was, I didn't run any fire calls, so I don't know how they worked, but I hope they did that. And if they didn't do that, that's not to my knowledge. Um, there was not proper leadership. There was leadership, but it was just loosey goosey. It was not, "Hey, such and such, you're an EMT, you do patient care. I'm the EMT, I'll be back up, I'll help you out. Hey, you're a probationary person, you're grabbing gear, you're grabbing whatever we need." And then, it wasn't, "Hey, as we're going to the call, you're doing this, you're doing that, you're doing that, you're doing that. Expect such and such. Let's be ready for such and such." Because usually what you're supposed to do, the general protocol, as you're going to the call, the leadership is supposed to, hey, to assign roles and duties and responsibilities going up to the call. That way you jump out your call, you're walking up to the call or whatever. You know exactly the moment you leave that rig, you know exactly what you're doing, and you're doing that task right away. It's not, okay, hey, who's doing the paperwork? Hey, what gear are we getting for this call? Um, hey, where am I putting this? It's you know exactly what you're doing. As the moment you step out of that rig, you're grabbing such and such piece of gear and you're rolling it out to that scene. Um, I would have to speak up. I'd have to ask, hey, the do we need a stretcher for this? For bad example, but do we need uh, certain supplies for this call? I'd have to speak up and ask them if we needed such and such. And I knew the basics of what they needed, but every call was different. They may need something different for a certain different bag or a different piece of equipment for this call. And I would ask, like, hey, do we need such and such for this call? Um, and another thing, a working code that was a really big mess. Would have a code or some of the breathing or do CPR with them. That was basically a Hail Mary. We do a working code, whoever arrived first. It was basically a working code where the sheriff department could arrive, could do CPR, basically CPR. Whoever's local EMS fire duty officer could arrive, she could arrive. Whoever's certified was on the scene first, and that was all hands on deck call. When that tone come off, no, you jumped in the rig and you went on. You went there. You jumped in the respective way. You went straight there, and those scenes can get chaotic because you would have, first of all, CPR is very hard. I did training. I never actually did in the field, but we did training, and it's a lot of it's a lot of weight and it's a lot of physical exertion. So you had to do rolls and usually a four person to one patient for CPR, one person doing each person. But you had to take turns because it was a workout to do CPR, and especially if you're doing for 2 hours. You had to do multiple people doing chest compressions, rotating in and out, in and out, because there was a lot of work doing the work we did, and the volunteer side definitely got it easier than the DES side, the paid crew. But the paid crew, they were there all day. They were there from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. to 7. They had 2 shifts. They had the night crew paid crew, and the day crew paid crew, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. They had 2 shifts. They needed a break. So they were happy when we volunteers ran calls for them. They were like, hey, you got this? We're like, yeah, we got this. They were very happy to have a break because there were certain calls that were BLS that they should not have ran when they had a volunteer supposed to be running, and then we have a crew. It was just me on the station or me and someone else. There should have been a better staffing for the rigs. There was insufficient staffing. A lot of times they would have fire calls or EMS calls, and they have to make up staffing, which means that people would report to the station, and then grab a station vehicle and go to the scene with additional resources or people. That shouldn't have happened. They should have made a sense that they have their crews together. Those are reliable, are on that rig from that AR shift. They're with that crew. They're ready to go on that rig at a moment's notice. When the tones go off, they were there, whether it was fire or EMS. A lot of times there are people in and out. I remember there was one time where the station, luckily it was not a busy day, it wasn't quiet at all, but I remember the members, they did a drag race. I don't know why they did a drag race. It was like an ego thing, but they just did a drag race. And yeah, there's a lot of downtime when you're not running calls, and I understand that. But why are you doing a drag race? That's totally unprofessional. You should not be doing a drag race while you're serving the community. You should be, hanging out, talking about maybe what calls are in, maybe, do some training. There's stuff to do at the station. Yes, there is going to be a lot of time sitting around, but there's learning opportunities. You can watch videos of, hey, let's watch such and such video and learn from such and such. Hey, let's, fireside guys, let's learn how to do an aerial attack. Let's review our aerial attack tactics. Hey, EMS people, let's review what we do for a like a multiple casualty person, or something like that. Like, you could have done so much training, and a lot of time we just spent time, bullshitting, doing, on our phones, hanging out, which is fine, but you need to have training. Like, every shift, I wanted to be trained. I wanted to listen to training that EMTs were getting and learn from it. But all we had was just kind of, socialize, and it was basically a community center, because during the off time, they should be resupplying, stocking, training, and cleaning. Clean the rig, clean the station, socializing and watching stuff to learn. There was none of that. There was no. It was like, hey, call finished. Let's go back to checking on our phones, or let's. There wasn't any care to after the call happened. There wasn't any care into discussing that call. For both EMS and fire, it was like, hey, go about your day, and when this call officers come together and deal with the thing again. It was very poor leadership on the both fire EMS, and I'm sure it's throughout Charles County. I looked at another friend of mine, a guy's post. It was definitely racism, definitely racism and discrimination. I know I was definitely racist and discrimination, and so that's probably the reason they voted me out, because they didn't like the way I looked or how I conducted myself. But I think I did everything right. I may have had some times where I was a little I said some smart remarks, but they told me that, and I'm like, all right, I'll watch myself, and I didn't do that anymore. So, and the time when I spoke up, what I probably shouldn't have, but it was to their benefit. It wasn't because I shouldn't have said anything. It was because I felt like I needed to speak up and to speak out to voice my opinion. And I understand of being on probation is like, having a trial run with them, but you still should want input from your soon to be members. You shouldn't want the all these old guys talking around be like no outside opinion. You should want to have you also want to value people's opinions that are new, that can have a fresh set of eyes. You want to have different opinions, and you want to value and appreciate and respect those people that are having different opinions, instead of being like, nope, like shutting people down that are, or don't have much experience, or don't have any, are in probation, or don't have them in the station that long. You need to value those people's experiences. Yes, they might know them. They might know a lot, but they also may, they may do a bit different, a point of view to that, whatever the discussion is. They may have had a friend that was in the fire service that could, hey, we did this at such and such station, maybe we can incorporate to this. Feedback and opinions are very important in an organization, because it gives you insight on how to improve. They weren't like, hey, they weren't big on improving. They were kind of set in their ways, and whatever happened, happened. They weren't like, hey, they weren't good at promoting being respectful, leadership and training in the Waldorf department. They were big on, we have our ways, and it's kind of lazy, and it works, but it is what it is. And I remember when I did with them, I was with them for about a year or two with Waldorf Fire Department, Company 12, Westlake Division, and I was there for them for about a year. By the time I was there, I got turned over. I was the second person in history to get turned over to ride so fast, because I wanted to be on the calls, and I did a good. Put all my, dotted all my T's, did all my I's. Did they notice that? No. They're like, oh, he's a hard worker. They don't like, thank you for getting turned over. We need more people to ride. They didn't care about that. They were like, eh. In fact, they were the other way. They're like, are you sure you're doing this? Are you sure you want to go ride? They were more questioning, are you sure up for this? I'm like, yeah, put me on the rig. I'll do whatever you need. Like, it was very weird, because the dynamic of the not wanting people to ride that were new and not getting enough crews, it was very sad. My dream going to that journey, that year I had, my dream was to get some certifications, to get my EMT, to get my EVOC drivers, to be a driver, and then through those certifications I earned from the department, to go with career with it, to be a career EMT and to be a career driver. And they said, and I told them that. I was like, when I was beginning, I kept reminding them throughout, I was like, hey, I want to be a driver, I want to do this career. And they're like, they didn't ask me when I started, they're like, hey, why do you want to be here? Why do you want to be here? I'm like, I want to be here because I want to make a career out of it. They didn't ask me, they didn't inquire on me. They didn't care. They're like, hey, if you make it, you're kind of on your own. There was no expectations laid out or rules laid out at all. And I pushed them to try to advance me to get the EMT class, and they said, no, you're not good enough, basically. And that was before they voted me out, which is really bad, because they were having trouble deciding on the initial, well, so I was basically there for a year because it was like a 8 month probation. They had me there for additional because they weren't sure. They need people to ride. They weren't sure. They're like, we're still unsure, so we're gonna keep you on a little bit longer. Which was good. I'm glad they extended it, but it was also bad because being undecisive was not good. They should have been. Yes, if they were thinking about a no answer, they should have been like, hey, there's some stuff that went wrong. Please improve this over the next couple. We'll give you this couple of months to improve it. We'll send you a probationary period, and as long as you meet these things, you're pretty much in. There's no guarantee of it in or out. They weren't giving me feedback along the way. There was like, hey, we had like one check-in. I remember one meeting, and that was it, in the back office with the assistant chief and officer. And it wasn't a good meeting either. It wasn't formal. It wasn't respectful. It was like, hey, you're talking to such people in not a nice manner. I'm like, I'm sorry, I I can I feel like I need to speak up because there's problems at hand, and I'm sorry if you take it as a being disrespectful, but I feel like there's opinions that need to be heard that are not being heard. The people, being silent about. I feel like I need to speak up. Um, and I had dreams. I had dreams to take a career and get my certifications I got from them, and they said nope. They didn't even know. I don't think they had. I told them, but I don't think they remembered or they were unaware of my dreams. They said nope, screw you. So, being in the volunteer service, I had high hopes and expectations, and they crushed my dreams. It was really sad because I still have an interest in being a firefighter, and they said no. I may get back into it in year, 2 or 3 years, but I'm at no interest right now because their lack of training and discipline and leadership and just. I hope, honestly, I hope they run themselves to the ground, because, and I don't mean like bad wishes on them, but I hope they get to a point where they start calling people back that were good. Because they are starting to go downhill as a volunteer organization, and I hope they realize that, hey, let's bring back such and such who was really good. Let's bring back such and such who was hardworking. They're gonna keep losing people as a department, volunteers especially, because they have no interest. And I know that, remember I talked with someone on both careers. They're like, hey, how was it during COVID? They're like, hey, people didn't come back from COVID. People didn't ride during COVID. We needed people, but there were no people. And I'm like, it is what it is. It is a pandemic, but you should be reaching out to people if they can vote out and say, hey, let's advance. Are you sure you? They weren't like, hey, let's follow up with you next couple of years once you're. And it was weird because once you get voted out, you had to like a waiting period. You had to wait. So I had to wait after I got voted out. I had to wait like a year to reapply, which is weird because I understand you need a little bit of grace period to like 4 to 6 months. That's reasonable, but to wait a year and then for the person to reapply, that's a bit too much. I do understand you need kind of a grace period, a little time to kind of reflect and kind of move on. But if a person was good, you should want them back. And if a person was bad, vote them out and say, hey, you got voted out because you weren't here, you weren't on time, you didn't show up to meetings, and that's the end of that. But if someone's working hard for you and putting in the time and effort, they should be rewarded. They should be guys. You should be getting promoted in the station, lieutenants, captains. Not the people that are lazy in leadership. It was very bad, and I wouldn't recommend. If you're like, if someone asked me on the street, we're like, hey, I'm thinking about joining Waldorf Westlake Company or Waldorf Fire Department, I wouldn't recommend them. I'd say, hey, try somewhere else because I haven't had a good experience with them. They're not good leadership or training. It depends on what you want to get out of them. If you want to get like some fun and cheap thrill, socialize. If you want to socialize with people and maybe run some calls together, yeah, do that. But if you want to actually learn and advance your career and don't go with them because they're horrible in training. This video's kind of get a bit long, but that's my follow-up video on my just a follow-up video on my experience at 12 and at Waldorf Westlake as a whole, Waldorf Fire Department. It was not positive. Yes, there were highs and lows, and yes, but overall there were the more time I spent with them, the more they exposed their flaws, and the more I could see it starting to go downhill. And interestingly enough, after I left, like 3 months after I left, they changed the leadership, which was good because I was like, okay, there's hope. And now we get to a news story. They're on the news. A buddy of mine, Tehran's on the news, and he's like, hey, they're doing stuff wrong. And I'm like, yeah, I've been saying that the whole time. And if you watch this, I really appreciate you watching it. Please look at my other video about my experience Station 12, or I'll make some other lifestyle videos. Drop a comment, leave a like. I'm happy to talk about it more. Maybe go some calls in depth. I'd love to talk about it more. Leave a comment, like, subscribe. Let me know your thoughts and comments on volunteer fire department in the comment section below. Should there be a department? Should Charles County continue with the volunteer fire department, or should they do paid crews? That's a good topic of debate. What changes need to be made to the Charles County Volunteer Association, Waldorf especially? Yeah, sure. Drop a like, comment your, tell your story in the comments for sure. Anyway, subscribe, like, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.